Hello everyone, Halo here with a new episode of Shakti Temple Talks. Today we are going to be unpacking the concept and the lived experience, the usually rather painful lived experience of fatal attractions. And while a fatal attraction is something that can take place in any relationships, this could be in a business relationship, it could be in a friendship, most often this shows up in intimate relationships. So I want to talk about this because it can be a gravitational pull that can be very hard for us not to move towards, and I think at the end of the day, it's generally a positive experience if it leads to growth. However, if we end up in a pattern of fatal attraction after fatal attraction, this can cause a lot of suffering, a lot of trauma in our lives. So I want to go over first what I consider a fatal attraction. This is the kind of idea of like a twin flame. So not a soulmate, not like where there's cohesion and compersion and all of that, but more those experiences where there's such an intense attraction, and at first it seems like it's going to be a fairy tale story, but then quickly karma starts to explode in both people's faces in the form of really deeply entrenched patterns. So there's a lot that we can go into with this topic, and we'll see where it goes. But fatal attraction, so this is something that I felt to speak on because it's something I experienced for a lot of my life. There was a very particular archetype that I was attracted to again and again. The feeling would be somewhat similar every time, especially in the beginning, and it's this kind of like feeling. Like at first it's just you literally feel like you're in kind of a fairy tale romance, and then quickly the pattern starts to show up again. So what we are looking for in fatal attractions, and this, so many of us have stories of like love not working out or these disharmonious relationships, and we all want a healthy relationship. We all want this kind of union that is deeply supportive, that is deeply truthful, that is deeply nourishing. What I came to after several rounds of fatal attractions was that I wanted my relationship to feel more like a sanctuary than a battleground. I do enough personal transformation work in other aspects of my life. I have big dreams that I want to accomplish in this life, and I want my relationship to be a safe harbor amidst this wild experience of life. And granted, there will always be transformational work to be done in relationship. It can be the pivotal point of so much transformational work, but as a whole, how do we want our relationship to feel? How do we want that to be? Is it life-giving or life-draining? And so what happens with fatal attractions, and they're actually a huge asset at the end of the day, because what they are these very deeply karmic relationships. And these relationships have to do with a patterning that we likely developed in our childhoods around what love feels like and looks like. Usually this is based on our relationship with one parent or both. And so we'll kind of seek this out unknowingly. It's like this very interesting subconscious contract that our souls do, and we'll be attracted to the people who are going to play this story out for us again. And what I realized in myself, so I'm really going to speak from my own experience because that's where I've learned the most. What I realized was I kept replaying this experience and hoping for different results than I got as a child. It was like an unfinished layer of childhood, an unintegrated part of my childhood that as a child we don't understand. You know, we're deciding about the world based on the influence of how we are receiving positive reinforcement or negative. And so we make all these assumptions about the world and center them around ourselves and our self-worth and all these things based on how our parents and those in our lives responded to us, cared for us or not. And it's hard to understand as a child that someone else has their own stuff that they're navigating, and we take almost everything personally and we internalize it and we create a story and an identity around it. So what happens before we step into our true and full sovereignty as adults, and what I mean by this is we let that story be what it was. It's part of our journey. We learn from it, but we're no longer subjected to it. Fatal attractions are when we are still caught in that story. We're still replaying. It's like replaying a broken record. Or like, have you ever, there's this movie that I just absolutely love called Kama Sutra. And I hate the ending. The ending is so heartbreaking. And I keep watching it, and it's like every time I watch it, I like somehow hope that there's going to be a different ending. But of course there never is. It's a movie. It's an already made tape that's playing. And so this is what fatal attractions are. It's always going to have the same ending. So how we can recognize that we have this patterning for fatal attractions is, well, have you noticed a pattern? Is there a pattern that keeps repeating itself when you get into intimate relationship? For me, there was a really solid pattern of infidelity that kept happening again and again and again, and it had to get to a point of being so poignant and so shattering that I got to this place where I was willing to do whatever it took to shift this pattern. And it wasn't a victim mentality of like, oh, I'm being cheated on, I'm being lied to, la la la. I had to go through that. That was part of it. But it was when I actually owned that I had a part in this equation, that I would get into these relationships, the red flags would start popping up in all different directions, and I'd conveniently ignore them. And it was like the universe was like, are you going to do this again or not? And I would just blindly walk towards the light and do it again, and didn't listen to my deeper instincts. I've learned so much about relationships through these processes. I've learned that oftentimes there's an imprint, there's an initial imprint at the very beginning of a relationship that will carry and even like expand throughout the relationship. So there's a lot we can know in the very beginning. How do we feel around this person? Do they bring out our anxiousness? Do they bring out our avoidance? Do we feel safe? Do we feel like we can be ourselves, or are we trying to be someone else when we're around this person? Do we feel like we can speak truthfully, or do we feel like we need to like kind of create hide ourselves or something like this? And so there are so many things we can know from the beginning of a relationship. And sometimes that really intense chemistry, this isn't true all the time, but sometimes that really intense chemistry is indicative of a potential fatal attraction, especially when we start to lose our reasoning power. This is when a friend might say something like, are you sure about this? And we're just gonna not even listen to any feedback. One of the things I did after the last round of fatal attraction that I navigated was I created a dating committee. And these were people that I trust and who, you know, when we have all the hormones and pheromones and chemicals going, we can't always see super straight. We're falling in love. It's like bliss central. We don't necessarily have our discrimination online. But oftentimes those that know us and care about us and have an outside perspective can see better than us. And, you know, the things I noticed in these relationships was from the very beginning, a lot of I tend to have an anxious tendency in relationships, would really come out. from the very beginning, and that would just end up amplifying as the relationship went. So it's really important that we pay attention in the beginning to how we're feeling. The other thing I had to do after going through, like I said, several rounds of this, one of the things I had to do, besides getting to the place where I was literally willing to do whatever it took to not replay that story. And I even had a moment where I was like, I literally felt like I couldn't survive another fatal attraction. I couldn't survive another betrayal. I couldn't survive another infidelity. Like, it was too shattering. It hit my core wound. And that's what these fatal attractions will do. They'll literally find our Achilles heel and shoot an arrow right into it. Now, this is, like I said, it's so painful, but it's one of the greatest gifts, because it's our opportunity to free ourselves from a particular bondage, a particular patterning, a particular storyline that we decided was true about our lovability, oftentimes, in childhood. And when it comes up again in the face in such an intense way as only a beloved, a romantic partner can do, that is our opportunity to shift the pattern. And that is very much what happened for me, is it had to get to a place of such potency that I was willing to take my power. I was willing to no longer be a victim. I was willing to no longer be naive or ignorant. I was going to do whatever it took. For me, that journey involved therapy, involved a lot of unraveling of these stories that I decided on as a little girl to be true about myself and my lovability. It had to do with me shifting what I was attracted to, who I was attracted to. And that was the biggest piece, was when I realized that there was a very similar archetype that I kept getting drawn to. And that's where I refer to this as a fatal attraction. There'll just be these archetypes in our life where it's just like we're so drawn to them, and it's really difficult for us to, it's like a moth to the flame kind of thing. We know it's going to burn, but we can't help it, and we fool ourselves and try to convince ourselves it's not. So I had my dating committee, which was a group of friends and very close beloveds that I was like, if I start getting anxious, if I'm dating someone and this starts happening, or la 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 la, you know, I want you to intervene. Like, please do. It was like, call me out. Don't let me do this to myself again. So I had that, and I had that with myself as well, where it was just like, all right, Halo, we're not going to, if there are red flags, like, I decided I was a one strike, you're out kind of girl, you know, because I kept giving more and more chances, and things would just unfold to these degrees. And when I say one strike, you're out, I don't mean petty, like little things, you know, we all have our stuff. I mean, when there are big, like these red flags, these particular red flags, if I saw one of them, I was going to walk the other way. And I made a commitment to myself that that's what it was going to be. Now, I also want to say that this isn't about demonizing the other, like, oh, this archetype is bad, or la la la, not like that. But there's a karmic contract between these two beings, and we're both going to play out these particular roles for each other that are important until we get it. We don't have to keep repeating painful lessons. We actually have the choice to be like, nope, I'm not going to do that again. But we have to be diligent in that approach if we want to actually get to the place of being able to have healthy relationships. If we have a pattern of fatal attraction, we're not going to have healthy relationships. If we keep going down the same road, it's like same road, same results, or we try a different road. And so I had to switch what I was attracted to. And this was a very subtle process, but it was just like I was looking outside of the normal circle I usually was looking in for intimate partners. I got really, really, really clear on my values. And another thing I realized in my experiences was that, you know, it's like we might be like, oh, I hope he has this, or I hope she's this or that. And we have a lot of, in our lists, we can have a lot of superficial shit. And what I realized was that none of that really mattered to me. What really mattered to me was shared core values. And when I talk about shared core values, I'm talking about things like accountability. Like, I wanted somebody who would be accountable. If they said that they were going to do something, that they'd actually do it. That if they were wrong about something, they could be accountable to that, and actually it would be okay for them to be wrong. That honesty, being able to talk openly, being able to be in the hard places. So commitment, to not just have a fair weather relationship, because that's not life. Somebody who is willing, had a willingness, that was a big one for me, willingness to be in some of the more gritty aspects of life and being human. So I just got someone who was caring. Caring was on my list. Genuine was on my list. My list turned from these grandiose, like, what he did in his life, la 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 la, to things that were just like a good human being kind of thing. And not that these previous partners weren't good human beings, but I realized that we didn't have shared value systems. And if you don't have a shared value system, that's foundational. You can't go very far without that. So I got really clear on that, and I started looking for people that had and lived, not just spoke, but actually were examples of these values that in my dating process, that would actually have these tendencies, and I had a magnifying out for when it wasn't that kind of thing. So what ended up happening was I was able to shift what I was attracted to. And actually, as that process started to happen and started to have results, I found myself like not at all attracted. Like, that fatal attraction archetype showed up a few times. There will be tests. We will be tested in this life. And the charge wasn't there anymore. Once I'd actually been able to remold what I was attracted to and what I considered attractive and what was actually important to me, and became more strong in my own sovereignty, in my own self, in my own discernment and gnosis of my worthiness and my lovability, and grew more confidence that I could have, because after I'd had so many failed relationships, failed quote unquote, and betrayals, I really questioned whether I could have a healthy relationship. And it's an ongoing practice, is the truth of it, and requires a lot of diligence. However, the main piece that I realized was off for me was literally who I was attracted to. Someone called it, we have like soulmates, and then we have wound mates. Wound mates are like these people that are going to just bring up those core wounds of us. And those will come up in relationship regardless, but there's a particular potency with fatal attractions where it's not, like I said, ideally in a healthy relationship, the relationship is a sanctuary, that these things can come up and actually be healed, can actually receive what they need. Usually these things, these core wounds, come from places of unmet needs, or of deep hurts, deep pains. So I guess this is what I wanted to share about fatal attraction. First of all, I just want to kind of go over the steps again so that we can liberate from these patterns of relationship. First of all, we want to recognize that it's not a bad thing, that ultimately these fatal attractions are deep, profound mirrors for us to see what we decided we believed about ourselves, about our lovability, about relationships. So if you're in that and you're like, oh no, be like, yay, now I see, you get to see the picture more clearly. So that you have to see the photo more clearly before you can change it, before you can start painting a different picture, before you can start writing another story. You have to get really clear, what is the pattern? What did I decide I believed about myself as a child or whatever? What is the dynamic I'm trying to heal through continuing to repeat this story? What's the result I'm hoping for? And then what are the steps that are going to actually get that result? Because that same road is not going to be it. So we want to start recognizing when that same road presents itself to us. There are lots of little cues. Oftentimes we'll look back in these relationships and be like, man, this thing happened in the very beginning and I had a feeling. We start catching that much earlier rather than after the fact. So we want to tune in with those clues more deeply and shift our systems of attraction. If we start noticing that we have a fatal attraction archetype, a particular archetype that we keep going for, it's time to try something new. It's time to try something different. So we can rewrite these stories. We do have a lot of power here. And it's just about more and more mindfulness and understanding the patterns that we are working to untangle so that we can have those beautiful, nourishing, healthy, supportive relationships that we all deserve. So I hope this talk was helpful today. It went a bit longer than I anticipated. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Feel free to reach out to me. This is something I'm very passionate about just because of my own journey, and from where I'm sitting now, I'm deeply grateful for the journey that I've had, because it, first of all, it was just incredibly fascinating. It's fascinating to me to watch these same patterns play out enough times that I'm like, you can't make this up. Like, clearly there's some energetic karmic thing happening here. So I think it's fascinating to have just witnessed my own journey with it and to have been able to liberate from that pattern. Super powerful, and we all have the potential to do that so that we can actually have what we deeply and truly want. So I hope there were some gems in here for you. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Agree, disagree. I would love to hear from you. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next Shakti Temple Talk.